Hello, and welcome to Strength Training Principles for the Athletic Trainer, Part 2, Sport, Skill, and Strength. Our presenter today is Glenn DeClaire. Glenn is a graduate of the Master's Athletic Training Program at Long Island University, Brooklyn. He came to athletic training from the world of exercise and personal training, where he has worked for many years with clients of many populations. Additionally, he holds multiple certifications from organizations such as FMS, the International Society of Sports Nutrition, USA Track and Field, and USA Weightlifting. Without further ado, here's Glenn.
Hello, and welcome back to this series of videos addressing strength and conditioning principles for the athletic trainer. Having a strong foundation in strength training places a powerful tool in our metaphorical AT treatment kit. As far as relevant financial disclosures, I have none, so let's just get right to it. Okay, so we are going to start with a quick review of some aspects of muscular strength, and then we'll further differentiate between muscular strength and performance strength. Then we'll switch gears and look at the neural side of strength and review some concepts of motor learning. Then we'll outline some factors that aid in creating an optimal learning environment. I will then take some of those ideas around motivation and compare them to something known as flow theory. And then we'll analyze some current research and apply that understanding to teaching good movement habits. First off, though, I'm going to start with the motto. This is the motto that I've come up with that explains how to master a skill in about as concise a way as I could come up with. Practice makes perfect. No, perfect practice makes perfect. No, mistakes are good, so just relax and have fun. Now, granted, that is an incredibly cumbersome statement, and there's a lot to unpack in it. But in essence, it's conveying the idea that in order to attain optimal performance, you learn a skill so well that you can forget everything you've learned and kind of act by instinct. And thankfully, for us, the same things that support optimal performance are the same things that can reduce our injury risk. Okay, so our sport performance is at the top of this little pyramid. There's a musculoskeletal piece, or the strength, and that's what we work on in the gym, right? Getting pumped, gains, increased cross-sectional area. And then the neural piece, the skill, what folks might not think about is something we're also working on in the gym, right? Each exercise is a specific skill. And even if you're just working on your biceps, it's a total body movement that involves the entirety of the central nervous system. And there are innumerable fellows out there that are masters at the skill of flexing their biceps from a hyperkyphotic, head-forward, pain-faced posture. But anyway, let's start and look at the strength piece. Okay, let's differentiate between muscular strength and performance strength. Right, muscular strength simply is the ability to generate maximum force against resistance. That is the brute power of our dumb muscles. It's our true 1 RM strength, which is tough to get even when you, quote, know what you're doing. So what is performance strength? My personal and slightly philosophical definition is something like the expression of the body's ability to generate force. Okay, so to frame that another way, if muscular strength is an individual's potential to generate force, then performance strength is the expression of that potential in the real world. Or yet another way, how much of our potential are we able to tap into at a given moment in spite of all the variables that can affect our performance? Right? And since performance strength exists in the real world, it is affected by everything, literally everything. So performance strength rests on a foundation of muscular strength. And even though we might not tap into that true 1 RM strength, the greater our capacity in the gym, the more we can call on when we need it. Strength is the foundation that our performance rests on. Right? But if we drill down further, we'll see that a balanced strength profile also needs its own foundation. This is a great quote that I love. There is no substitute for greater muscular strength when it comes to improving an individual's performance across a wide range of both general and sport-specific skills, while simultaneously reducing their risk of injury. Right? Improving performance and reducing injury risks, both things we'd like to see. So being stronger allows us to perform better, longer, with resilience. This is nothing new. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that we put the neuro back into neuromusculoskeletal. Okay, so here's one example that I always think of to illustrate this total body exercise concept, right? That each movement is a total body motor pattern. Straight arm lat pull downs. Okay, when a patient has a head forward body position, hyperkyphotic T-spine, I'm sure the glutes and midsection are not all engaged, which equals the dreaded anterior pelvic tilt. And for good measure, we'll say that the ankles and knees are collapsed also. I mean, it's obvious, it should be obvious that this is not an ideal position in which to pull something. But even if you do manage to get strong with this exercise in this position, the specificity principle is going to tell us that that strength might not translate to anything else. Okay, quick physics review. Maximum force. I love that term. It's the science way of measuring muscular strength, right? The elusive unicorn, truly ultimate 1 R rep maximum. And getting a truly accurate measurement of this, even in a lab, is difficult just because there's so many variables. And attempting a 1 RM comes with inherent risk and will also create a training stimulus. So if you use it as a test, your results are immediately going to be skewed by the test itself. So we usually estimate with a 5 to 8 rep max. Just a quick reminder from the last video, force has a magnitude and a direction. So it travels in a direction and it always has a point of application when we act on something else. All right. So what happens when we extend the arm or leg? The fancy way to say would be that the torque around our individual joints combine to express linear motion in the outside world. Either we're interacting with another body in the outside world or we're moving ourselves through the outside world. So this is a list of structural factors that are going to determine muscle length and therefore tension and therefore force development. Okay. Movement direction, also known as muscle action, right? Whether the muscles are lengthening or shortening under tension. Whether it's a single joint or a multi-joint muscle, can a muscle generate force as effectively over 2 joints as it can over 1? Perhaps, but it probably depends on your posture. Joint moments, right? This basically refers to how the segments of the kinetic chain are distributed around the line of action of the resistance. Right. The classic example of this is the high bar versus low bar back squat. Right. Depending on how far your various segments travel from your midline, knees and hips, different muscles are going to be called on in different ways. Now, I'm not picking a side in this debate. They both have a place. It just depends on your goals. But posture is something to think about, right? Lastly, we got posture here. If your posture is garbage, the alignment of your joint moments is also going to be garbage, and your muscles will probably also be functionally inhibited if they're not an ideal length. Right, so posture is something I personally emphasize in every workout I lead. I'm frequently saying eyes up. I use that as a cue because I find it goes a long way to fixing kind of a lot of postural issues. And by simply redirecting someone's focus, we can, improve the posture, increase the efficacy of the workouts. And for our athletic population, they're usually familiar with the phrase, the body goes where the eyes go. So I find that's a helpful cue for athletes because it, translates it to competition. Okay, so the totals in the big 3 lifts are impressive. You're good in the gym, but is that strength going to translate to the performance venue? If we're working on maximum muscular performance in the gym, on the field, we're looking for the absolute best performance. Now that's pretty vague. What does it mean? Well, it depends on the situation. So the best foundation, right, is one that's ready for any combination of variables. I listed some examples of resistance tools in the gym that can used to train for specific things. I'm not going to go into each of these tools, but the point is that once you've established a strong foundation, you can use these different tools to focus your generalized strength into specific sport performance. And systemic factors are all the other things associated with being a human person, right? This is where I dump everything that isn't the skill that affects how you perform the skill, right? Nutrition, sleep, illness, psychological state, and your muscular strength all combine to determine your performance strength. The internal factors that are going to affect this are everything that's part of the structure and function of the athlete. The structure part is things like anthropometrics, the $12 word for body proportions, right? Lean muscle mass, fiber type dominance, amongst other things, right? Structural, some things we can train and some we can't. And the function then refers to the ability of that structure to complete tasks, right? The central nervous system takes an idea, our desire to move, translates it into nerve impulses, our muscles move, and then based on multiple kinds of feedback, continuously fine-tune that movement in real time until we've done whatever it is we were so motivated to do. Right? The inter and intramuscular coordination refer to how efficiently individual muscles get activated, and then how those individual muscles work together as an entire motor unit. All right. This is a quote from Musashi. I would love to do a whole lecture on this guy, but this will suffice for today. Again, this kind of emphasizes the idea that I'm trying to promote with this lecture. The true science of the martial arts means practicing them so in such a way that they will be useful at any time, and to teach them in such a way that they will be useful in all things. And I'm going to take core stability as an example. I will frequently see and hate seeing athletes doing a plank, zero glute engagement, collapsed spine, staring down at their belly button. And it's like, no wonder it's hard, and no wonder you don't seem to be getting much better at it. So if we can train core stability, not just by making the abs physically stronger, but training the habit of, quote, keeping the tailbone tucked, or, quote, the abs crunched, when we're squatting or running or even sitting for extended periods of time, right? We can make the abdominal region stronger and apply that strength to activities other than staring at your belly button while you're struggling to hold a plank. Okay, so now tailbone tucked and abs crunched are, again, cues that I personally use to combat the dreaded anterior pelvic tilt. The main point, though, is that whatever cues make the most sense to the individual are more likely going to become habitual. Right? So if we can train good movement patterns in addition to strength, we can see the benefits not just in the gym, but everyday life and athletics as well. So we know that performance strength is a combination of muscular strength and skill, but what is a skill, and how do we learn and subsequently refine a skill? Skill has a couple meanings. It's used to talk about the ability to do something and the ability to do something well. And so playing the C major scale is a single skill. And while we wouldn't necessarily think of playing Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 14 as a single skill, it is. Of course, it's made of layers and layers of other skills that the performer calls on without conscious thought. So playing one piece of music, or running the 800 meters, or executing a floor routine can each be viewed as a single skill, which are built upon layers of foundational skills. Foundations, right? Sounds familiar? And then there are some people that seem to acquire certain skills with such an ease that we call them talented, right? And others become skilled through dedicated and focused training. But regardless, everyone has to start somewhere. So how do we make the learning process more efficient and lasting? When you put intention and adaptation together, congratulations, you've learned a skill. I'm not talking so much about the somatic adaptation today. That would be like the plastic changes in your central nervous system as a result of learning a new skill. But I am going to talk about the intention piece, right? That's the most important consideration when we're trying to create an environment for learning, right? I use the word intention, and I'm similar to the word expression earlier, because it indicates that someone is motivated to do something. Because really, we don't do anything in life that we're not motivated to do. Right? Sometimes that motivation is internal, like receiving continuing education in your field because you're genuinely interested in it. Or motivation can also be external, like being required to get CEUs to maintain your certification. Or, right, as is probably normally the case, some combination of internal and external. And now, when you're motivated to do something as an end in itself, right, that's called being in a state of flow, right? It comes from flow theory as an autotelic experience, something that's done for itself, not necessarily for the reward. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Let's quickly review the stages of motor learning here, right? The cognitive, we start out the initial phase where you really have to think about what you're doing. You probably look foolish. And this is where some athletes will check out immediately because, and I'm directly quoting now, they don't like to suck at things, right? So this is a period for setting realistic goals and realistic expectations. All right, and we move on to our associative phase, right? This is the period where the links are starting to get made, things start to click together. And essentially, we have skill acquisition at this point, but it still requires significant focus. And then once we've reached the autonomous stage, this is good because we don't need to think about it anymore, but it's bad because we're not thinking about it anymore, right? And here's, if we go back to the motto, here's where that perfect practice makes perfect piece comes in. And so once we're at this autonomous stage, we can either check out mentally and just do things with bad habits that have crept in and will eventually get worse, or we can continue to refine that skill. Ideally, you kind of keep going between that associative and autonomous phase, as you refine your skill. Okay, so that's how we learn stuff. How do we get people to learn things efficiently? I'm just going to point out that I said learn efficiently, not necessarily learn to do the task efficiently. We can facilitate learning with the help of the motivation and attention triple play. Okay, the three things on the left are the elements of the triple play, and their effects on learning are on the right. I'm going to discuss the elements next, but I'm going to run through their effects right now. Okay, so when all the elements of the triple play are in place, right? Performance, learning, both skill acquisition and retention, and task focus all are increased, and self-focus, which for obvious reasons can interfere with performance, goes down. Okay, so we're going to look at now these three things on the left: expectations, autonomy, and external focus. Okay, so this study is a pretty narrow example, but it pretty well illustrates how performance expectancies can affect learning. All right, this study was done on kids learning basketball free throws, and two groups were separated, and one group received a positive social comparative feedback, something along the lines that their scores were better than some other group. And the next day, the performance facilitation group had higher learning of the task, higher levels of perceived confidence, and persistence related to the task, which I think is probably the most important thing. If if there's the expectation that you can improve, you might be more willing to persist through. Right, so there's some early evidence that enhancing performance expectancies will help motor learning. And this is a narrow application, but there's more research coming out on this topic. And it's also something I've been applying as a personal trainer You have to challenge people, but you can't set them up for failure, because if someone gets frustrated, they're mentally checked out, and then at that point, we're just exercising, we're not training. And of course, athletes in general have a low threshold for looking or feeling silly or incompetent. So we have to be familiar with scaling options and progressions that are achievable but challenging, right? And a little ego stroking probably helps too. Any halfway competent AT, I'm sure, knows the benefit of some well-timed encouragement, but now we're getting some science to go along with it. And now this study shows kind of the dark side of that same idea, right? If expectations are negative, all those arrows on that previous slide are going to turn the other way, right? I'm just going to point you to this study, but I'm actually going to share my own little story. When I was a kid, I was, quote, bad at balancing on one leg, right? I was bad, and every time I tried, which was infrequently, because I was so bad, I continued to be bad. So I assumed I was bad. It wasn't until later in life, once I finally started getting some exercise, incorporated single leg balancing into my routine, something amazing happened. It was like my body responded to that repeated activity I was subjecting it to, and my neuromusculoskeletal system adapted in such a way that I could more efficiently maintain upright equilibrium. And I'm sure I would have scored much higher on a competency questionnaire. How about that, right? I practiced something and got better. So in my case, my negative expectancy was caused in my own head because I was, as usual, being too hard on myself, right? But I think we may all know an athlete or two that may be too hard on themselves. So if we get someone that was previously very athletic, who now has a long road of boring, stupid rehab in front of them, how can we reframe that as something that is not boring and stupid? That's the $1 million question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer. Other than that, it's going to depend on the individual. Okay, autonomy, right? This is pretty self-explanatory. If people feel like they're in control of something, they're going to invest more into it and subsequently get more out of it. This study looked at an improvisation intervention on figure skating performance, right? Self-esteem, creativity, and mindfulness. And now, again, this is a narrow example, but this time we're dealing with elite athletes, so the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Right? We had 9 elite figure skaters that participated in a 10-session program based on Cirque du Soleil artistic principles. And they noted that improvement was shown for creativity and artistic performance variables, right? The skaters used terms like more free, attention better focused on performance, overcame shyness, right? So a little more vague on the benefits, but since these are very high-level competitors, I personally would be more predisposed to listen to their intuition about their own bodies. They're probably pretty well in tune. Right. And for anybody, really, increased confidence is a tangible benefit, even though if it's a little harder to quantify. Okay. All right. And we'll bring up the last element of the triple play, external focus, right? And how this might relate to training habits, training better movement habits during our rehab and strength training. All right, external focus is something, again, I use all the time for a glute bridge, right? Do you say squeeze your glutes or lift your hips to the sky, right? You can probably see that the hips to the sky metaphor is going to give you more of the movement that you're looking for. So the study on the left investigated the effects of an external focus, right, by a visual stimulus, and an internal focus by a verbal stimulus. So on a cutting movement, right, by male and female athletes. Now, in this study, the males had greater improvement with the visual cues, and the females had greater improvement with the verbal cues. So at the very least, this is evidence that cues always need to be personalized, and that you cannot teach the same thing in the same way to everybody every time. This other study on the right took 40 healthy athletes and they did a drop jump, right, with 3 different variables for their feedback. We had the verbal internal focus versus verbal external focus versus video. And of course, the poor, stupid control group. Oh, no, I didn't mean the control group. The internal focus group was told something like, extend your knees as fast as possible after you land. The external focus said something like, push on the plate as hard as possible or push the earth away from you. And the visual group was shown a video of someone doing it properly and just instructed to copy that. Then later they did a retest of the jump and also tested a 45-degree cutting motion to see if there was any transference. And the external focus group improved the most on jump landing technique and had carryover to the sidestep cutting movement. But there was still improvement with the internal focus as well. So that's not to say that it's worthless, but the most improvements was in the external focus and the visual group. So the visual is still another form of external focus too, right? You're seeing something outside of yourself. I'm trying to mimic that. Speaking of internal focus, I would argue that there is a place for it. I feel like it's mostly gets maligned, but I would say that the place is somewhere toward the late beginning, right, intermediate phase. After that motor skill is learned, right, as I'm teaching someone a brand new movement, I don't want them thinking about their glutes or their quads. I'm trying to teach the movement, but once it's down, then we can dial in. It's like, okay, this muscle's not working hard enough, and we can dial in our refinement of the skill, right? And then to come back from the motto from earlier, that once the athlete has truly habitualized those external and internal cues, the balance of those external and internal cues, that is when it's time to forget everything we've learned and just, quote unquote, have fun. All right. Flow theory. How am I going to shoehorn this topic into this lecture? We'll see. So you probably know what flow is, even if you don't know that there's an academic subject devoted to that feeling of being in the zone. Right. I'm just going to highlight some things that are relevant here, specifically with comparisons to the triple play. Right. This is not an exhaustive list of flow theory. So concentration on the present moment. Right, that relates to our task focus from earlier. You're not thinking about something embarrassing that happened yesterday or something else you need to do for tomorrow. You're in the present moment in flow. Right, there's the merging of action and awareness. Even though your mind is focused on the task at hand, you're not overthinking what you need to do. Right, it's so autonomous that you can stay task focused and not think about your actions. Right? Some people describe the feeling of watching yourself from outside of your body. Right? The loss of self-consciousness, again, is pretty clear-cut. This is the same as that loss of self-focus from earlier. Now, if you put all those together, it sounds metaphysical and like it shouldn't work. Like you're doing something, but you're not thinking about what you're doing, and you're not thinking about something else, and you're not even thinking about yourself. You're simply doing. Okay, and agency is the other criterion for achieving flow. This relates to the autonomy piece we were talking about before. And in this case, it's pretty clear that if you're doing something that you're obligated to do against your will, you're more likely to be thinking about not wanting to do that thing. Okay. Expectations, right? This has to do with our expectations, are very important to achieving flow as well. So in order to achieve flow, the thing you're doing should be challenging enough so that you feel the need to get yourself focused, and you also need to feel as though your skills are equal to the task. I was trying to not use graphs in this, but this is a good one. So basically, if we feel like our skills are well beyond the challenge, there's boredom, and then we're in the bottom part of that lower triangle. But if we feel we don't have the potentials to succeed, our skills won't even give us the potentials to succeed, we're going to have anxiety, right? So typically when we're in the middle there, right, in that flow channel, we're having that autotelic experience, right, where we're having the pleasure of the activity done for its own sake. Then once we're there, we maintain that state of flow through some kind of immediate feedback that lets us know if we're doing it right. So in like a 100-meter race, that feedback is the clock and your competitors. Pretty straightforward, right? To someone learning to play scales on the piano, that note that sounds really off and bad is your immediate feedback that you made a mistake, right? But if you can play everything through perfectly, you can stay in that flow state and perform well. All right, so then we'll just talk about a little more about cueing now. So how do these ideas relate to us, and how can we use it when we're dealing with somebody and teaching someone a new movement? Because a lot of these rehab movements are new, unfortunately. So immediate feedback is needed for that flow state, but when we rewind a little to look at the motor learning part, when someone is learning a new movement, too much cueing while they're doing it while they're actually doing the motion is counterproductive. I personally only try to give movement cues in between sets, because the more someone is listening to me while they're trying to squat or something, the more distracted they are from the movement. And I mostly don't even like having athletes look into the mirror, because they're processing the visual information, trying to think about what to do and trying to fix it in real time. I find it's too much. And so there is some also research that says that video feedback is good, helpful, because you're able to process your movement corrections with some detachment from actually doing them. Okay, and exception for there is an exception for cueing during the movement, right? I mentioned that I'll tell someone eyes up during squatting, right? But what I didn't say is that in between sets, at some point, I told them, okay, I want you to keep your eyes up, right? Not up at the ceiling. I want you to look out at the horizon, pretend like you're looking through the wall out at the horizon. But then when they're doing it, when they're actually squatting and they start looking down at their shoes again, I just say eyes up, which will help fix the posture. But I don't literally mean eyes straight up. So the time for clarifying your cues is in between sets. And during the motion, then you can have one or two words that you can shout just to remind your athlete of what you talked about. Okay, the error or allowance piece in there also goes along with this too many cues list. And I know lots of athletes have terrible squats and planks and all these various movements. But rather than trying to fix everything at once, right, pick one or two problems to work on per training session or rehab session, right? If the squat is bad and their T-spine and their ankles and their hips, you're going to have to pick one thing at a time, essentially. Not just from a physical standpoint, but also from a motor learning standpoint. All right, and the last one there, the random practice arrangement, relates kind of to the autonomy piece we mentioned earlier. An example of this would be something like an athlete has a choice maybe between two different rehab circuits that are both designed to target the same areas, but seem different enough to them that they feel like they're doing something different, and they have some agency over what they're doing. So why did I talk about all this flow stuff, right? Because a lot of the principles aligned with attaining flow are the same things that aid in creating a learning environment, good learning environment. All right, well, I said I'd look at this later, and here we are. My concise recommendation for mastering a skill. Practice makes perfect? No. Perfect practice makes perfect? No. Mistakes are good, so just relax and have fun. I mean, I came up with this as a joke at first, but it's broken up into 4 stages that are relevant for expressing your performance strength. Right? Practice makes perfect. We're trying really hard, we're struggling, and we're getting way better. 2, perfect practice makes perfect. Okay, so I'm really good now, but so is everyone else around me. So I better start practicing the right way. Right? And then number 3, mistakes are good. Well, I did nothing but practice the exact right way, but my opponents weren't playing the right way, so I wasn't ready for it. Right? And then we get to finally number 4, whatever, too much practicing, I just want to play. Right? So by that time, hopefully the athlete feels confident enough in their strength capacity and skill level to deliver that coveted optimal performance. Thank you very much. This is the study that has that triple play in it. I would recommend taking a look at it. And we'll see you next time.